So, in today's lesson, we're going to be painting the Autumn Chickadee. So, an overview of this canvas I'm using, it's a 10 by 10. Okay, so I've got out my colors. My palette's a little messy because I was just filming my other autumn video painting, which is on my channel of painting an autumn bouquet, sunflowers and fall leaves. So that's what I did here. But I've got out my paint here. I've got the colors all laid out, and I'll list the colors for you so you don't have to worry. And just going to be using a few brushes today. I've got the Princeton Velvet Touch, a couple of those, and this is a brush I got from Meeden, and it's an acrylic brush, and it's just a 3/4 inch wash. And what else is here? I think that's about it. I'll also be painting I'll use a little catalyst wedge in this video as well, but I'll use the smaller size because it's a smaller canvas. So put that there. And I'm just getting myself organized here. It's always fun. Okay, so I'm going to look at a reference photo and just sort of um, sketch out my drawing of the tree because I want to have that kind of basic detail there. So I have this is just some paint I had out yesterday. It's transparent brown oxide and some dioxazine violet that I had mixed up for the sunflower. And I thought, I'll just kind of sketch this little tree here. And then we can kind of go from there. Once you have, your spot for your birds, it makes it a lot easier. I always try to make the branches, not perfectly straight. There's some a few branches in there early on that later you can kind of edit out, or some of them you keep, some of them just make nice kind of like background marks. There's going to be a lot of leaves and everything in here, so just make sure I got enough movement in that tree. And then I'm going to quickly go and look at my chickadee reference here and make sure I get that in before I put too many branches in there. And make sure to get you this reference if you're on my Patreon. You'll get downloadable reference photos for all these videos. I just love painting chickadees. They're so cute, and I love the contrast between the black and the white. And it's kind of birds like birds that were in my yard growing up, and I really like them. And there's the cutest little feet. And the drawing doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to be able to cut in some of the background in to reshape it, um, or you can, paint over. Like this mask needs to be fixed, and I know that, so I can just later I'll go and I can cut into it, the white paint, cut out the shape that I want. So I'm not too worried about getting it perfect. This is a real kind of whimsical, fun painting. And I want room to put some of the leaves. So even those I'll kind of maybe doodle out a little bit so that they're there. So I've got a reference photo up right now, and I'll have both of them available of some of the yellow. There's some really pretty yellow leaves. Just using some of that transparent brown oxide to put in some of that. And I'm looking at the reference, but also just kind of going with my imagination, just putting in some really pretty shapes. Kind of just doodling and having fun with it. Almost like when you put a Christmas garland around on something, it just kind of adds a little intricate, kind of delicate feeling to it all the little leaves. And there's really no reason why I picked that pink color. I think I was going to start a different painting on it, and I thought, well, it'll be fine for what we're going to do today. But sometimes I like to just start with different colors and whatnot. All right, so once you get that sketch on there, I'm going to go back to my chickadee reference. Now I can start blocking in my chickadee. So just keep using this little brush. It's kind of an old brush, but it does the job. This is one of those velvet flat shaders, Velvet Touch. And they do have a velvet touch. They're kind of soft. So I'm going to put a little bit of this. This is just some yellow oxide. I can mix in a little brown oxide there just so it's not so yellow. And then I'm going to get a little cobalt and some of that transparent brown oxide. And all these paints I'm using are inexpensive. They're all Liquitex Basics, except for this is Golden brand. The transparent brown oxide is a golden color. And I'm just going to add a little white into that. Cobalt and transparent brown oxide just to get a nice kind of warm gray color for those feathers there. And also I'll use a little bit of that and just gonna clean off this area of my palette so I can mix on it, even though it's messy. Just get some of those different colors in there right away. And I want to get some black in the in these feathers. So I'll get just some straight black and just put in the shape of the feathers that go into the tail, because we'll add the light feathers on top. It's got the cutest little beak. And I'll just block in some black for the little claw. I'm going to get a little more white into that gray mixture and sort of build up a little bit more of that shape. And I'm just going to make sure that I kind of reshape where everything's going. So I'm just looking at where the eye is and the overall shape of that little mask that our little chickadee is wearing. And I can already sort of blend into the black some little marks to show that just to show some of those feathers going in, mixing in there. And I'm mixing up kind of a variation of the cobalt blue and transparent brown oxide to make these feathers. You could also use, I've got some burnt sienna out here, and if you don't have transparent brown oxide, you could use a bit of that. And then I'll add a little more white to that and a little more to warm it up. I'll use some of that yellow oxide. And that's just sort of build up some of those lighter feathers. little more white and yellow oxide in there. And I'm just going to mix a little cobalt and black together just to get kind of a just a different kind of shade for down here. And I'm looking at the overall shape of that little bird's neck there and just kind of shaping that in. Now for the lighter feathers, I'll just kind of get some more white into that mix and tiny, you could use a little touch of that burnt sienna just so it's a little warmer and just sort of add some more feathers in there. And mix in a little yellow oxide into that mixture and just add a little bit of that lighter, those lighter yellowy feathers up here. And then as the bird kind of has more of a cooler shadow color, I'll use a little cobalt in that mix and just sort of put in a few of those kind of cooler blue toned white feathers in there. And then I'm going to go and just kind of use the edge of my brush and, put in a few of those pale feathers there. And then use some of that for blending here. And then I like to use a little bit of cobalt and white in some of that mix. I'll just kind of put a little highlight on the bird's beak, and then I'm going to mark kind of where the eye is a bit. Once you make the shape of the eye like that, you can go in with the black and just sort of leave an edge so that you can see the edge of where the eye is, like that. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for a little bit and I'm going to start working on the birch tree. So I'm going to try it out with using this catalyst wedge. And I'm going to use a little bit of this for the bark. I've got some blue gray out and I can use a little touch of that. And I'll use some of the white that I've got here. And I want to kind of add a little of that transparent brown oxide, and that just makes it easier. I could make the same kind of brown color with some ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and white as well. So I'll show you how to do that if you don't have the blue gray. And we'll just get more paint and kind of block in that birch tree, trying to make it kind of fun with this using I did a video where we use the catalyst tool to paint the whole thing. So I'll put a link to that too in the description so you can do a whole landscape with the big spatula. But this is kind of fun to try a small scale. Mm. And then while you got all that paint on there, what I like to do is I'll grab a little bit of just a little bit of that black and drag it in, to the edges of the tree. Just get some black, and especially where there's going to be this branch is going to be one of those black birch branches, you can kind of mold it into the paint. And you got some. You can just drag some of that in. And then let that sit for a bit and see if you want to add more in a little bit. But I like to sort of start off with a little like that, and then I'll let it sit, and then I'll come back to it. You could always get a little bit of that white and use your spatula to add a little bit of a lighter, kind of warmer color of white gray to that. That's just some pure white I had on there just for fun. Okay. And that adds a lot of nice texture to that. While I'm thinking of it, I could even add a little more texture to the bird with some of that bright white just to really get some and get a little blue and add a bit of that to the bird so you get some texture all around there. And I can add a little bit of that yellow. Texture to that bird. Okay. I want to get in there and get some of those branches in. So some of that, the birch tree has some brown and darker branches that come off of the trees rather than and then there's some that are white, some that are really dark. So do a few of those darker ones with the transparent brown oxide. and just trying to keep it simple. And then this one, um, I put in a brown, transparent brown oxide start to it, but I think what I'll do is I'll make that one of the ones that grow in with the white birch on it. So all the white birch color on it. So I'm just gonna take my spatula and kind of add a bit of that white to it. And grab a little bit of that black and just sort of blend that in like that. And then I can even take some of that black and put in a few of these branch marks in there. Okay, so now I'm gonna sort of play around with the background because we got to figure out the background a little. So what I'm going to do is my reference photo shows a bunch of green and then there's a bit of blue sky coming through all the leaves. So just for fun, I'm going to take a little of this cobalt blue and I'm just going to use let's see, just going to use a bit of this palette paper so that it stays clean. And I'm going to mix a bit of that together. And I'm going to pop in kind of some of that blue for the sky. Sometimes we paint the background in to keep it real simple. And then sometimes I like to pop the background in after I draw so that it's not so simple, but it leaves that pink kind of shining through in between the leaves. And I even think that when you paint the background in like this, you can imagine more of your composition. I'll just get rid of that branch. You can imagine other parts like the background shining through as being part of your composition. So I learned from some Canadian painters that do landscapes that are really good, like real professionals. And they would even talk about the shape of the sky being a part of the composition so that even the sky holes, you can create a pattern in your painting. So it could be the blue sky forming a V formation or a real diagonal formation. And I learned that from them. So I'll leave some shapes of leaves because later I want to show some of that pink coming around. So I'll just kind of imagine that. But it's a really little bit more work, but I enjoy the fact that then you have like a third layer basically. Um, the pink is kind of another layer of interest in your painting. I'm not going to get too detailed with it in this painting, but I'm going to pop in a few more notes here And then we'll start adding some of the yellow and some more branches. And we can go back and add some more of that sky in later. And also we can change maybe some of the value of it so that we get a different variety. And then we can imagine that as the sky shows through, maybe there's sort of a basic green background for all the leaves to show up on. So I'll take a little sap and I'm going to mix that in with some of that blue. That way there's a little color harmony. And that makes a really pretty green. And I could start adding that, but I'll also want to make sure I have enough of it so that later I don't regret not making enough. And so I'll take a little bit of that white and cobalt blue. Then I also like to mix in a neutral into my painting. So I'm going to add a little bit of that burnt sienna and cobalt so it gets more muddy looking, more of a neutral tone for my green. So it's not all just this real bright green. And even that, you could tone it down a little with some burnt sienna, just so it's not overwhelmingly green. So then you could also make a mixture where it's a little more on the yellow side. So take a little bit of the sap and I added some of this cad yellow light. So now there's a variety of greens and you can work with those. I'm not using my Stay Wet palette here, so I'm just going to grab my spritzer bottle so I can keep the paint wet. I'm just gonna give it a little spray. I kind of, as you can tell, as I paint, I kind of come up with my ideas. So you kind of have to bear with my scatterbrain, not having it all organized ahead of time. It's because I kind of come up with new things as I go. Just leaving some space for those little flowers. I mean, not flowers, the leaves. And we can put leaves on top, but I do want to leave that a good amount of that pink showing through. It's just kind of fun. And chop sueyed my tree here. Just gonna take some of that paint off. So I'm gonna start just really kind of getting this in there quicker so I can keep it loose too. I don't want it to look, I want that green area to look kind of loose. And I'm gonna lighten it up a little because it's gonna be, I want to put some of that up there a little lighter. And we'll come up with another shade just to balance out all the greens too. So maybe even a tiny bit of that dioxazine purple in there is gonna, and the white and that green is gonna have a more of a gray tone here and there. I just want to balance it out, and throwing a few neutrals in there really helps. And make a neutrally greeny blue color too. And before I get going on the yellow, I'm gonna get a little more, just a little more of that sky in there. And you'll notice I made it a tiny bit darker. And I'm just kind of adding a little bit of that lighter pink just to sort of blend it a bit. Alrighty, so now is the fun part. We've got all the different yellow birch leaves. So I've got some cad yellow light here, and this is some cad yellow deep. We can add some of that. I want to start off with adding a little bit of, I can add some of that burnt sienna to some of it, and even some of this sap green that I've got on this palette from before. So it's more of a darker yellowy green for the underpaint. And I'm just going to blob those on. Just with my brush here. This is a different brush I ended up grabbing. Somehow I ended up with this Princeton Flat #4, Princeton Summit. And I'm just kind of adding different yellows now just to that same kind of pile. Mix up a more muddy green yellow using that burnt sienna sap and cad yellow just to kind of get some darker tones. And just keep going. Just sort of adding different shades of yellow now. And I could even try it with my little spatula, get maybe even looser marks. Okay, so I'm gonna go and try that out. First of all, I might go and just kind of decide what I want to do about these branches a little. Put a few of those in. Put a few branches in there. Now that you've got some color, put a few little branches going down. Just adding a little bit of black here and there. Some of this gray and sort of put that in the shadow there. And I could put some of that gray that I used in the greens for the tree. Just put a little bit of that in the shadow. Okay, now I'm gonna go and take my little spatula tool because I want to really kind of get some more paint on those. Oops, I got a blob of paint on my painting. So we'll deal with that later. Actually, before it dries, I'll just wipe that off, use a little bit of water and just get rid of it. Okay, so now I've mixed in some white and yellow, and I'm just going to put some nice little marks for those really bright birch leaves, just for fun. Just something new to try. You may have to go back and forth and get more paint on your little tool, whatever one you're using. You know, I kind of have to recalibrate my paint on each time I go and dab because the paint kind of comes off. And put a few little dots here and there, some real small little sparkles in the distance. Get some of that cad yellow deep in there. Put a few nice warmer colored leaves in there. And I kind of try moving it different ways to get different shapes. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my chickadee and kind of look at adding a little bit of more detail and a little more texture. So use my little spatula and put on some thick paint for the little black cap. Get some nice thick paint on there, and then I'm going to get a little bit of that gray and just make sure that he has a little bit of a outline on his eye, and I always like to put a little sparkle. Little sparkle in the eye. And I'm just gonna kind of go and add a little more detail to the branch he's sitting on. Just kind of work in some of that kind of bluey gray color. And go back and get some more white. And I'll get a little bit of I'm going to get a little bit of that cobalt blue. And I like to just kind of make sure you can see a little detail on the little feet. So I'll add a little bit of that blue. And I like to use some of that cobalt in the shadows of some of the branches. Sort of put some of that in there. And a little bit of detail back on this branch for the birch. And blend it in a little. And then another shade that we could put in, just kind of this a little bit in there, is maybe a little bit of purple because we got all that yellow. Few feathers. I like to put a few of those feathers kind of flying around there. You could mix up a little dioxazine violet and some of that white and just add a little green to it to kind of dull it down a little. And you could put a little bit of that in the mix here and there. Put that in the tree shadow a little bit. Just have fun with the color. Add a little more, whimsical vibes to the whole thing. And you could take a little bit of it, make it lighter. You don't have to, but it's just kind of just more things to play with. A little more color to play with. A little bit of purple in the mix doesn't hurt anyone. And then I'm going to go in now and add a little more detail with that green. So I'll just touch up some of these more messy zones that I kind of overlooked earlier. Give my color a little spray here. A few green notes up here. And then I might go get some more of that cobalt and white and just get some of that blue and kind of go over some of the spots that, earlier you missed and you put some more blue in between the birch leaves here and there. Pop in a few, bits of sky in between. between the leaves. And then you could just take a bit of that yellow and just do a few real, you know, delicate little blobs of paint here and there just to really kind of add a little detail work there. And just gonna go and add a little bit of paint around the bird's beak a little. And I'm just gently kind of adding some paint into the bird there just to kind of loosen up the edge there. And I might even just sort of soften some of the branches a little by cutting into the edge with some of that background color. So I can cut into that branch a little just to make it a little smaller in a few places. Kind of take out some of the edges on some. That's just sort of a simple, quick, and easy overview of how I would go about painting chickadee and a fall scene like fall trees. In this case, I really felt like painting a smaller version of the birch. So the only thing I might add is, maybe just one or two little hints of a more of an orangey color. So I'll just mix some of that alizarin and some of that cad yellow deep, and I'll just put in a few warmer toned leaves, maybe around where the chickadee is, just to warm up the foreground a little.